Well, welcome everybody. We're just thrilled to have a great group here for our first webinar in our what is now our monthly series on relocalization. And before we get started, I'm just going to do a brief land acknowledgement and a bit of intros, and then we'll get into it. So, um, my name is Andy Horslow. I'm the executive director of the Center for Local Prosperity, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So there were two sides to that treaty. The indigenous folk and the non-indigenous. So we are all treaty people. And I'm coming to you from the heart of Sigaybenegedig near the Glooscap First Nation. So that is where we are, the land we stand on. Just for those of you that don't know us, the Center for Local Prosperity is a charity based in Nova Scotia. We do work throughout Atlantic Canada. Our vision is an engaged, regenerative, rural Atlantic Canadian communities where everyone feels empowered to make meaningful change and have equitable access to the knowledge, skills, and resources to do so. And the role that we play is that we seek to empower rural Atlantic Canadian communities to strengthen their local agency for the future by informing, building connections, creating pathways, and catalyzing new initiatives. And our website is the Center for Local Prosperity, Center for Local Prosperity.ca. You think I would know that? Before we get going, I'm going to hand off to my colleague Bob Cervelli. We're going to ask that you do two things. That you turn off your video. So just click stop video on the bottom left corner of your screen. And then the second thing, at that same little icon, it says stop video. There's a little arrow, a little up arrow. If you click that and choose video settings, you can there's an option to hide non-video participants. So by doing that, what we'll do is we'll just have Bob and Michael Shuman, our guest speaker, on screen, and everybody else will be kind of in the background. So again, if you down at the bottom left corner of your screen where it says stop video, there's a little up arrow. You click that, you'll see a little box will pop up for settings, and click hide non-video participants. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest and then hand off to my colleague Bob, who will be leading this webinar. So our guest today is, I'm just thrilled, couldn't have a better person to kick off a webinar series on relocalization than Michael Shuman. He's an economist, attorney, author, entrepreneur, and leading visionary in community economics. Currently, he serves as an adjunct professor at Bard Business School in New York City and a senior researcher for Council Fire, where he performs economic development analyses for states, local governments, and businesses around North America. He also publishes a weekly newsletter on local investment called the Main Street Journal that currently reaches over 8,000 readers. Michael is credited with being one of the architects of the U.S. Federal Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act of 2012, as well as dozens of state laws overhauling securities regulations and crowdfunding. He has also authored, co-authored, or edited 10 books, including Put Your Money Where Your Life Is and The Local Economy Solution, How Innovative Self-Financing Pollinator Enterprises Can Grow Jobs and Prosperity. As an important side note, Nova Scotia's own Linda Best and FarmWorks are featured in the Local Economy Solution, and Linda will be our guest for our April webinar. Finally, Michael's a prolific speaker and has given an average of more than one invited talk per week, mostly to local governments and universities, for the past 30 years, in nearly every U.S. state and in more than a dozen countries. And he was the keynote speaker at our first local prosperity conference in 2015. So everyone, I'll just ask that you welcome Michael Shuman, our guest, and I'm going to hand off to Bob.
Thank you very much, Andy. And yes, let's get underway. I'm going to be interviewing and chatting with Michael for about 20 minutes. Then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you've got questions as Michael and I are talking, put them in the chat box. One of our staff, Liv Langell, she's going to be reviewing the questions, pulling those out when we get into the Q&A portion. And feel free, we've got a number of folks from the US and across Canada, so feel free to put in the chat where you're from and just say hello. That would be great as well. So Michael, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you this morning. As Andy said, we go back 10 years. We've had you up here a number of times. I remember vividly how you famously gave a report card to the Ivany Commission report, the Now or Never report back in 2015. And you've helped us quite a bit along the way, looking at economic leakage across Atlantic Canada and a lot of other important localization issues like that. But right now, we've got a huge topic on our hands. It's bubbled up quite quickly. You know, I was looking around back in 1969, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the first Trudeau, he made the comment that economically, Canada, it's like sleeping with an elephant, the US. And anytime it moves, it's a big deal. So right now it's doing a whole lot of moving. And I think that's what it would be very interesting if we could just roll up our sleeves and get into that. So I'm not sure the best way to start with this. Maybe if you could give us a little bit of a big picture on just the economic structure. I imagine they're somewhat similar, US and Canada, but just in terms of localization, impact of tariffs, that sort of thing. I've always used the rule of thumb that the Canadian economy is 1/10 of the US economy. You just move the decimal point over for just about everything. But if you could give us some big picture scope on how we stand in Canada relative to the US.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. It's great to be here, great to talk with you folks, and great to pad my application for asylum, which is coming very shortly. What I'd like to reflect on is that we had a pretty good trade relationship until President Trump was reelected. And now we're engaged in this silly tariff war. And I just want to say, as a sort of clarifying point, that tariffs are a form of dumb localization, which is to say that it is true that tariffs can result in enhancing local industries because you have to replace what you're missing from the tariffed goods and services that you otherwise were importing. But it is dumb because it increases costs for everyone. It stifles innovation. It benefits a small number of industries, and it enhances international tensions. So it has taken a very robust friendship between the United States and Canada and really poisoned it. And you see evidence of that poison in lots of ways. And I do want to contrast that with smart localization. Smart localization is about choices. It is about intentional choices that one makes to buy local, invest local, it's choices by individuals, by businesses, by government entities. And I feel like that is the moment that we're being called to. And I guess if I can just add one other thing, Bob, which is that I believe that localization was already well underway. And we can get into the details, but just one data point is that it is really easy to localize services. And both countries have been, like all industrialized countries, moving rapidly into a service economy where probably 70, 80% of the expenditures we make are in various kinds of services, information services, healthcare services, professional services. And that is great news for localization because it means that localization has been the reality and we just need to build off of that. And I feel like that is kind of what is exciting about this predicament because we have an opportunity really throughout the world to respond to this nutty tariff design and say, okay, this is an invitation for all of us to start accelerating our embrace of various localization strategies because these strategies are going to increase our wealth, they are going to make us more sustainable, and they're going to enhance our social well-being.
So, Michael, you said that smart localization involves choices, but it seems like with all of the tariffs coming down, we're really in a choiceless situation. It's being
Well, you
forced
do have
upon.
choice because you could say, well, we're going to succumb to the tariffs and not make any deliberate choices at all. And I imagine a lot of countries or a lot of communities are going to do that, just say, well, we'll just respond to what the market says. What I'm saying is that the market is giving you one piece of information, but you as an organization, you as individuals, you as businesses, you as Nova Scotia can make very deliberate choices about how to accelerate localization as a way of inoculating yourself against this nuttiness.
So where are the opportunities then, the silver lining? We're being forced into this. We can start to make the acceleration, as you said. So what should, and that's what CLP has been all about. Our whole history is trying to empower local, small, rural communities with economic agency, particularly in times like this. So what would be some of the opportunities? Where should they be focusing?
Yeah, so I've been trying to make a list, a pretty comprehensive list of localization strategies. And right now, my list is 10 items long. We're not going to have a chance to go through all of them, but I'll just call out a couple of points and maybe we can mention some of the others as we go along. So, one is, which I think I'll just call out because I feel it's an area where many of us in the United States look to Nova Scotia with awe and admiration, is on local investment. And you folks passed a law to create CDIFs in 1998, and your next speaker, Linda Best, who's I'm pleased to see with us today, uh, runs one of the great CDIFs called FarmWorks. And these are local investment vehicles. These are vehicles that encourage people to put their pension savings into local entities that reinvest in the Nova Scotia economy. You have about, I don't know, 60, 70 CDIFs. If the United States had as many per capita, we would have 22,000. Um, so it really, it is, to me, it is an inspiration for how and why we should try to get a local investment fund in every community in the United States, frankly, in every community in the world. But big picture, you in Canada, we in the United States invest nearly all of our pension money in multinational companies that have no connection to place, that lead to a leakage of our investment dollars and diminish our local well-being. And CDIFs are one of many tools that we can use to begin to redirect those precious dollars into our own backyards to enhance our community well-being. So let me throw one other idea out there too, and that is, um, there is a lot of talk, a lot of interest in circular economies. Circular economies are all about how do you take waste from one set of industries and make them the inputs for other sets of industries. About 2 years ago, I was uh, did a little speaking thing in South Australia, and South Australia has created this incredible green industry program where they put substantial taxes on waste products and use those tax dollars as a way of enhancing circularity within the South Australia economy. That can and should be done by every community in the world.
Interesting. So, we've got these tariffs coming down on us. I do want to get back to your list of 10 there. But first, let me ask, we've got these tariffs coming down. It seems to be shifting sands almost every day when you look at the headlines. Are they a good part of localization for Canada?
No, terrible part of localization because no one wants to localize with a gun on your head. And and I think, not a small number of Canadians are really mad at the United States for good reason, and that anger will discourage collaboration. Now, I appreciate and applaud that the people on this call will look for solidarity, and you will find plenty of solidarity. I live in Palm Springs, California. We had a public concert 2 nights ago that I went to. Uh, it was sponsored by the American Legion, which is a veterans organization. They called out American veterans to stand up and get applause, and then they called out Canadian veterans because we have many Canadians who roost in the winter in Palm Springs, and they received a standing ovation. So there is a sense in the United States that we have this incredible tie with Canada, and through that solidarity we can defeat this menace of Trumpism and Trumpist inspired tariffs. So to me, that is why we have to build our alliance, not run away from it.
So solidarity and an alliance cross-border, but then I would also hope within specific regions, um, you know,
Absolutely.
got that gun to our head, so we've got to start to pull together some of these tools. You said you had that list of 10. Can you give us a few more? And then
Yeah,
hopefully time for another question or two, but
yeah. So one of them is trying to encourage communities to collaborate internationally and to see innovation. So if I had to, narrow down my favorite slogan these days, it would be to innovate locally and share globally, which is a way of saying that every innovation that you successfully implement, like C. diffs in Nova Scotia, can and should be shared widely with communities all around the world, and they are eager to learn about it. And you may be interested to see the latest wind electric technologies or battery technologies that we have in Palm Springs. or the latest circularity technologies that we have from South Australia. But that is why, as a way of accelerating how we respond not just to Trumpism, but to these emerging planetary crises, I feel like we need to share innovations really quickly. Um, Lots of people despair that the Paris climate framework, the COP, Council of Parties, is falling apart. uh, there is some despair that's associated with that, but it's honestly an opportunity because national governments were never going to save us from the climate crisis. It always was going to be the innovators at the local level figuring out how to work with one another. That's what we have to do now, faster and more furiously.
So it seems like it comes down to connectivity and communication across regions and even internationally to find out what's going on and how do we, that's a new form of importing, I would think.
Yeah, importing ideas, importing and exporting ideas, and running circles around the
And
Neanderthals at
no
the
tariff
national borders.
and no tariff on those.
No tariff.
There you go. Okay, so we just found a workaround.
Well, and there are many others too. I will just say that let's talk about economies of scale, because there is a belief that one reason we need these big non-local businesses is that certain things must have a gigantic global economy of scale. And I'll concede that there are a small number of things like that. They probably constitute under 10% of our two economies. But they're noticeable 10%, like our auto industries. But I think what is important is to just connect small businesses into associations that enable them to achieve higher economies of scale. So my favorite example is True Value and Ace Hardware are hardware producer cooperatives. Actually, one of them is no longer a producer cooperative. I forget which. But the idea is that these small individual hardware stores cannot compete against the big global giants, whether Canadian Tire or Lowe's or Home Depot. But if they collaborate together in these structures of producer cooperatives, they have the same ability to scour the planet for great deals, buy in bulk, deliver marketing services to the local members, and compete effectively. And so, where economies of scale are difficult at the local level, we need to be more creative in creating these structures that knit these individual businesses together into more powerful regional and global entities.
That's interesting. We do have a similar example in Canada with home hardware. They're all locally owned, but they're able to coalesce enough to have a huge inventory at their disposal. If it's not on site in a given store, they can order it and have it brought in within a day or two. So that's quite a good story right there. And Atlantic Canada, particularly Nova Scotia, we have a long history of cooperatives. Um,
Yeah, and cooperatives are, I think, enjoying a enormous renaissance here. So at the business school where I teach, the students have decided to create their own worker co-op owned consulting service as a way of helping to pay their bills, which is really, it's just a brilliant design, but it's expressive of how many business students see co-ops as the design of their future.
So we're going to get into some Q&A. I see there's some starting to show up into the chat, but let me throw this at you. I think I asked you this previously. Trump, you know, very soon into office, started to throw tariffs around. With Canada, he was initially mentioning the reason was fentanyl. I had to come up with something, I guess. What do you think is his actual agenda? Why? And it's not just Canada for that matter. He's sort of bouncing around all over the place internationally.
Yeah. So it depends on who you're looking at within the administration. I feel that most of the people that surround him have no particular economic agenda. They just are supporting him. And he loves tariffs because they give him the ability to exercise power willy-nilly day in, day out without consulting Congress or anyone else. And it also enables him to exercise leverage in deal making. So tariffs go up, and then he can say, okay, I'll bring them down if you give me X. And X could be fentanyl, X could be on immigration, X could be on the automobile industry. It'll vary from time to time. But it is this idea that the way you exercise power is by threatening people. It is not using military power yet, although it may come to that. I can't say that that's not in the heads of the people around you. But I do feel that there is an alternative way of thinking about the world, and maybe the trade relationship that we have set up through NAFTA and its successor was not the right framework. I very much disagree with a lot of the rules that were set up in that framework. I don't think they were unfair to one country or another. I think they were unfair to small businesses and local governments on both sides of the border, and that's what we need to fix. But the construction we have right now is one where the exercise of power by a Caligula-like president is going to damage everyone on the planet.
Fascinating, fascinating. Um, we've got one question. I want to introduce Liv Langell. Liv, can you turn on your video? Hello, good to see you. She's been working in the background on all of this. Thank you very much. Helping us launch this series, by the way. And just to revisit that for a second, we are scheduling these for the last Thursday of every month, kind of your noon lunch and learn, if you will, at least Atlantic Canada noon. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other time zones. And Michael, thank you for joining us at 8 in the morning your time. We got you going. I assume you got enough coffee there. So it's going to be the last Thursday of every month. We've got Linda Best, and I think 2 of the portfolio companies are going to be represented on that one as well. Is that right, Liv?
Yeah, it's gonna be a panel discussion with Linda and a couple of Farmworks investees.
Okay, that's great. I see we've got some questions coming in, and don't hesitate, anyone, to put a question in the chat. Michael is a great resource. I can vouch for that. He's a localization expert and certainly keeping tabs
No,
nationally.
yeah,
Okay, so we're gonna start with the Q&A.
Sure, let's dive in.
All right, so we do have a question from Henry, and I'm just gonna read them out. So Henry asks, how can we demonstrate that investing in domestic projects, particularly infrastructure and climate resilient initiatives, can deliver comparable or better risk-adjusted returns? And how might this evidence be used to encourage Canadian pension funds to reinvest more locally?
Yeah, so this is a question that we're very early in this universe of investment in resilience related infrastructure. So it's going to take a while to develop good data around it. But most of these resilience investments are going to go through government agencies. And so there's going to be municipal finance to back it up. And, a municipality will get involved in these projects if there are identifiable um, returns associated with it. So the returns could be what are the avoided damages that you might get down the road if you don't do this resilient stuff. For give you an example, so I've done work with the Baltimore Department of Public Works on stormwater management. And stormwater management is important because it actually hurts a lot of property value when you allow stormwater to roll around the city willy-nilly without any control. There's the further cost associated with stormwater, which is that at least before this administration, there were requirements that the city clean things up. And so to avoid that infrastructure expense, there would need to be some increased management measures. And these kinds of costs enable one to create investment opportunities that bring rates of return back to the people who invest in them. What I will say is we do have a growing body of evidence on the rates of return associated with local investment more broadly. And the best study of this, honestly, I think, came from Nova Scotia. So, you folks in Nova Scotia, when you created C. diffs, you created these tax credits for people to put money into the C. diffs, and the C. diffs created some number of jobs. So you commissioned a study a couple years ago to look at, well, all right, in terms of lost money in taxes, what was the cost per job created by the C. diffs? Now, to put this in perspective, in the United States, our nutty municipalities have bid anything from $500,000 to $1 million per job in order to try to tempt Amazon to coming into their community and building a second headquarters. Those kinds of payments per job are very common in the US incentives and economic development landscape. The cost per job of C. diffs was not $500,000. It was a little over $500 per job. To me, that is a powerful piece of evidence that local investment is like a superpower for creating jobs at relatively low cost.
That's great. I'm going back to Henry's question there, particularly the last part where he asks about Canadian pension funds and how can they reinvest. So I remember, Michael, Gregory Hemming and I, back probably 5-6 years ago, we had a conversation with the head manager of one of the provincial pension funds, well in excess of $1 billion. And we were talking with that person about carving off a very minuscule amount to invest locally in local startup businesses and so on. This would be even outside of a C. diff. And dragging his feet and so on, basically said that, well, it's their fiduciary responsibility to maximize return on investment. And they would always hide behind that as an excuse. So is there a way to kind of lean into that and open it up a bit more? Where there's
Well, there is, but I would say on risk-adjusted returns, there are lots of local activities that you can do that will pay spectacular returns. So the best paying investment that my wife and I have made is putting solar on the roof here in the desert. And we're, our monthly utility bills for air conditioning in the desert was running around $700 US per month. Now it's all free because we put the solar on the roof. And there are a growing number of cities in California. So I'm just beginning to work with the city of Irvine, which has 350,000 residents, to get solar on the roofs of every business, every residence in Irvine. And in my mind, this is going to be a spectacularly well-paying local investment opportunity for people in and around Irvine who want to put money into this project. So, all right, let's put a line under that and say there are some local investments that maybe have lower rates of return, private rates of return, but still have high social rates of return. And that is something, that is a distinction that most people in the conventional investment universe don't understand. Like, why would anyone think about social rates of return? Why would you care about your children or your neighbors? Well, if you do care about your children or your neighbors, you are willing to accept slightly lower short-term rates of return for the long-term rates of return that you will get from various investments in your community. And do I think that pension funds, the biggest pension funds are going to recognize this? Probably not. And the way that this has to happen, I think, is so let's again, for purposes of this conversation, put it more in the context of Nova Scotia. You need more C-diffs with more of a track record for pension funds to have confidence to put money into them, and then your friend will start saying, okay, this is a good thing to do.
So there's a risk track record that's attractive, a manageable level of risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the same thing in the United States. I mean, we have 10,000 funds in the United States. About 40 of them allow grassroots investors to participate and are focused on local business or local projects. Most of them are under 5 years old. They don't have a track record. Pension funds would be irresponsible under
Yeah.
law
Yeah.
to invest in them. But in 10 years, that's going to be different.
Yeah, that could be. You mentioned social rate of return, and it made me think of there's several municipalities in the region when they're doing their procurement. They are willing to pay 10% more if it's a locally owned supplier, recognizing that there's going to be a multiplier effect and that social return on investment. So, but that's at the municipal level.
And honestly, that's not even a social rate of return. That's just a very concrete, measurable increase in tax dollars that come from that local procurement. So I feel like, yeah, we need to be restructuring procurement along those lines.
Liv, how are we doing with questions? I haven't been keeping very close track there. Looks like some very good comments coming in.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a different topic for the next question from Anne, which is how much of this do you think is for control of the Arctic?
So yeah, so if we were to walk inside Trump's brain and clear away a lot of the distracting stuff in there, you would see a giant risk board, for those of you who played the childhood game of Risk. And you would see that he gets excited with large land masses like Greenland, like Canada. And yeah, so control of the Arctic, sure, that's probably part of it, but it's not control in some realistic sense. It's not like our ships have been denied shipping routes in and around Greenland now, and we have to open them up, or that Vladimir Putin, at least at a point when he was an enemy, that he would be taking over Greenland and denying us shipping routes. So it's really just this very abstract idea that territory equals power, and just like the U.S. presidents of the 1800s, territorial expansion is a way to make him and make America great again. I mean, it's really that crude. And uh, I I hope it doesn't happen. And if it does begin to happen, the domestic support for Trump is going to crumble that much faster.
I love the analogy of the risk board.
Mm.
I remember long afternoons in high school, everybody hunkered down around those. Yeah.
Okay. We've got another question. Linda is asking you to comment on RFK and the health impacts, not only in the US, but globally.
Yeah. So I believe that RFK is a public health fraud, and lots of people in the public health community, the academic community, agree with that. He was not put in a position of the head of Health and Human Services because of his expertise. He was put there as a payoff because he was able to bring the 4% of misguided Americans who followed him electorally. He was able to bring them behind Trump in the ultimate election in November. Um, so, in my mind, whenever someone says, I'm doing X with RFK, it's like alarms go off in my head. Um, and to just give you, I mean, this isn't, I don't mean um, to trade in um, insults and denigrating comments, but let's get very specific. We have a measles outbreak in Texas right now that is spreading. It has killed a number of children. It has infected hundreds of others. Any sober public health response to that would call for doubling our efforts to vaccinate children to prevent the spread of this. What RFK Jr. has called for is the spread of the use of vitamin A, which has nothing to do with preventing the spread of disease, but it is a kind of a, mythical thing that's talked about in non-expert circles for curing measles. And we now have children going into hospitals in Texas because their parents, following RFK's bad advice, are overdosing them with vitamin A and killing their livers. I mean, it could not be more appalling what he's doing. I could give you 10 more examples like that. So he is a model for what happens when you put people in power not because of their expertise, but because of their political um, political willingness to bend the knee.
Well, I want to thank Linda for posing that question. And Michael, good to hear your thoughts. It's obviously an equally enormous topic area to the economic localization that we're talking about this morning. Liv, I see we've got some more questions coming in.
We do. All right, I'm going to read out another one. This one's a bit long, so just bear with me. Thinking that if we don't get the climate challenge right, much of the rest won't matter. When parts of the world become uninhabitable, people have to go somewhere. Because of Canada's geographic size, it will have to be a big part of the solution, even if it contributes little to the issues driving climate change. There's an opportunity here for initiatives at the local level to address and economize climate mitigation strategies. For example, what is a carbon credit worth? Is there a local opportunity here?
Yeah, local opportunities everywhere. And uh, I do think that more and more parts of the earth closer to the equator are going to become uninhabitable or less inhabitable, and there's going to be a rush of people who want to move into Canada. So you're going to face some immigration pressures yourself. And to me, that's a tremendous opportunity to get the best and the brightest involved in the technologies and businesses around mitigation. Uh, we have just laid off uh, tens of thousands of incredibly brilliant scientists who were associated with our national institutes for health and other major federal institutions. If you're smart in Canada, you will hire them and you will bring them into your system and raise your gross domestic product as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting with the whole immigration issue. We're not like the US where we've got that southern border, that goes all the way down into Central America and South America. And there was that whole flow of people coming north, very similar to Africa moving up into Europe. So you see that in two different parts of the planet. So here we are above the US, and so there's not nearly the pressure to immigrate or um, for illegals to try to cross the border in some way. It is happening.
Except for me. I may cross the border illegally, and you'll have to figure out what to do with me.
Okay, there you go. I do want to point out, by the way, David asks, he says at the end, what is a carbon credit worth? There are some shining stories in Nova Scotia. One of them that comes to mind is a private company called Growing Forests. They're developing a new model that's not just resource extraction, which is how most of the forest industry works in the region here. But the new model is the tagline, be a great bumper sticker, is get paid to grow trees. And so they're basically looking at how much carbon is sequestered per acre in different tracts of forests. What's that worth on the open carbon credit market? Which is a pretty well-developed market at this point. And so can they generate revenue by growing trees and then also going in while maintaining the overstory of the forest, doing selective harvesting of a few stems here and there. So there's some, like you pointed out, economically, there's always some innovation that's going on and innovation that could be exported and brought into other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, and this is a part where I think smart government policy can be enormously helpful. So go back to the example I mentioned earlier of South Australia putting prices on waste disposal. And those prices generated a whole ton of money that was then used to improve the circularity of the economy. It's the same thing with carbon, that if a province or a state or, if you can get the country to do it, is willing to set a system with a higher price of carbon, um, it will spawn a whole range of industries around that. So we have the power. People forget, yes, we love free markets, but markets are based on rules. And for things that the market doesn't value but should, and carbon emissions is one of them, a government intervention that sets a price on carbon can create a whole new powerful market.
Okay, thank you. Liv, I see there's some more questions in the chat.
Yeah, the next question is from Duncan, and he's asking, what are your thoughts on community bonds as part of the solution? So he was on a call with Tapestry Capital, which is for community bonds, I believe. And they've been part of 135 million into community bonds.
So, if Duncan can unmute, because my recollection about community bonds in Canada is that you're talking about lending instruments to nonprofits. Is that right, or is it broader than that?
That's right. And
Okay.
cooperatives, I believe, as well.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, community bonds are one of a dozen tools that enable us to put money into a variety of businesses. And yeah, and nonprofits are certainly part of the mix, because even though nonprofits can't take equity investment, they can take loans. And uh, I think one of the best things one can do for nonprofits from a community investment standpoint is help them buy their property. Because when you look at most nonprofits, about 70% of what they spend is their personnel and services, and 20% is rent, and the rest is everything else. So if you can get that 20% out of the equation by getting members of a nonprofit or somehow outside investors to help that nonprofit buy its property, you enable that nonprofit to do 20% more with every dollar that's given to it. So, yeah, all of these instruments are interesting to me. You know, in the United States, we do a lot of crowdfunding around nonprofits. We allow that. One of the things you allow is you allow crowdfunding around investment vehicles. We don't in the United States yet. And so we keep going back and forth, learning from one another on how to improve our local investment ecosystems. And community bonds is something that I would like to share with more Americans.
Okay, that's great. We've got a few minutes left. Liv, maybe one or two more questions?
Yeah. Okay, next question is from Alan. Alan's wondering, Michael, if you've heard of the Nova Scotia Loyal Program, and if so, if you can comment on it.
I have not. Tell me about it.
Okay, it was the current government, when they first came into power, they created this idea that it would be a way to stimulate local purchasing,
Mm.
identifying locally made products, Nova Scotia products, create some pride around that, and stimulate a way for the consumer to identify those and begin to purchase those.
Yeah, so that's great. And these are so to go back to the opening couple of minutes of the webinar, when I said smart localization is about encouraging smarter and more mindful choices. Those include choices by consumers. And if you have programs in effect that make it easier for Nova Scotia consumers to put their money into the goods and services that have the highest multipliers and higher benefits for your local economy, that is a very smart program.
So you could almost say political power starts with your wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. So I think we've got time for one more, Liv. I see there's one from Robert.
There is one from Robert. That's the last one. So Robert's asking, what are some emerging vehicles or methods for local investment that you see as having high potential?
Oh, there's so many, so many. But um, I still, so the last book that I wrote, which you were kind enough to mention in your introduction, is Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. And it was all about how to move your pension fund into self-directed vehicles that then can enable you to do more local investing. So in the United States, these are self-directed IRAs or solo 401ks. In Canada, these are self-directed RRSPs. There may be other ones as well now. But we need to expand awareness and use of these things. We probably need to improve some of the rules around the use of these things to encourage more people to do more self-controlled, self-targeting local investments, and I think that will make a very, very big difference.
That's great. So I think we should probably start to wrap up here. Liv, I think you were going to provide just some comments, and we certainly want to give some information how people can reach out and stay in touch with Michael as well.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and kicking off our new series. We're very excited about it, and you were the perfect first guest, so thank you for that. Folks, if you would like to stay up to date with Michael, I'm just dropping some links in the chat. Michael has a free Substack newsletter called the Main Street Journal, so I put both the link to the website and to the direct link to the Substack in the chat. So yeah, this was the first webinar in the series, and we are going to be hosting these once a month on the last Thursday of every month. So next month on April 24th, Linda Best from FarmWorks Investment Cooperative, along with a couple of FarmWorks investees, are going to join us for a panel discussion. So for those of you that don't know, FarmWorks promotes and provides strategic loans to food production and distribution related businesses in Nova Scotia. So that should be a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. I will get the recording to everybody, if not today, at the start of next week. And hopefully you all join us next month on April 24th.
And I understand the recording will be posted on our website and people can go there as well.
Yes, that's right, Bob. It definitely will
And
be.
that is centerforlocalprosperity.ca. And for those of you in the US, it's the Canadian spelling of center. So you got to
throw that in the chat as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you again at the next one.
Thank you, Michael.